right. So today we're talking about practicing Sabbath. Just in case you're not sure what Sabbath is simply a day to rest. It's the fourth commandment of the 10 commandments, and it's probably, and very strangely, probably the hardest commandment to keep, resting once a week. Many years ago, I had read this book, and it was just this really great story. It was by a woman named Dana Trent. She's a pastor, and she and her husband took a trip, a very intentional trip, to Costa Rica, to a monastery there, because their lives had gotten really, really busy, and they realized that they no longer were having a day of rest, that their lives were just so full. She said, we didn't mean to give up a day of rest, just life got chaotic. You know, there's certain times in your life and you can barely breathe, and you're just doing everything you can do, and you're having a good life, but you realize you're too busy. And so they took this very intentional trip, and they said, we're going to go to Costa Rica, and we're going to learn how to practice Sabbath, which seems like a funny thing to do, but, so they go, and she said it was a wonderful week, and about halfway into the week, she said they decided to go for a horse ride into the jungles of Costa Rica, and they went, and it was a group of people. They all were given horses, and Dana's horse was an old horse, about 105 in horse years, and her name was Sweet Baby Girl. And so she said, I got on Sweet Baby Girl, and we started traveling. They traveled for 2 hours, and what she said was really ended up being kind of a treacherous journey. And she said, finally, we're coming back. And she says, we're hot, and we're tired, and we're thirsty. And she says, I just want to go in and take a shower and just lay down. I am so exhausted. But her horse had other plans. So 20 feet shy of the barn, the horse just stopped. And she was like, I was so frustrated. We all got off our horses. The other horses went into the barn, but we couldn't leave because my horse was stuck. And she said, we tried to coax her. We tried to drag her. There was no moving Sweet Baby Girl. She was just determined. She says, we even went and got a bucket of water because we thought she's got to be thirsty. She says, we were just so thirsty ourselves, and the sun was pouring on our heads and our necks, and we were sweaty, and we were just like, come on, you stupid horse. And they took the water, and they put it underneath her mouth, and she wouldn't drink, and she wouldn't budge. And Dana said, in that moment, I had a revelation from God. She says, we all know we need to practice Sabbath. We know we need to take a day to rest. Everybody knows that, right? She said, but I learned that day, you can lead a horse to water, but regardless of whether you are human or equine, you can be too stubborn to drink God's generous offer of the refreshing water that comes from Sabbath keeping. Isn't that true? We can just be too stubborn to do what God asks of us. So for the past month, if you're new with us today, either online or here in this building, we've been going over different spiritual practices. And we're doing them because these are ancient practices that are good for us. They will help us with our relationship with God and with a successful living. We do those things because they're inspired of God. But the funny part is that still we have a fight in us. In the book of Jeremiah, there's a great passage in chapter 6, verse 16, that says, the Lord proclaims, stop at the crossroads and look around. Ask for the ancient paths. Where is a good way? Then walk in it and find a resting place for yourself. But you said, we won't go. You see, we all tend to be a little bit like Sweet Baby Girl. We get stubborn about things, and we don't even know why we're stubborn. We don't even know why we're resisting. In fact, if you resisted one of these weeks to practice one of these spiritual disciplines, you probably resisted all of them. I mean, some of you, tossed that little card that you should have gotten when you came in today as soon as you got home, or just didn't take it with you because you kind of thought, I just don't do stuff like that. I'm not going to do that. And you're not unusual, because we often resist the things we need the most. But as we said, we were doing this because we were trying to get us prepared for the Lenten season. Because, as I've said, we're going to read through the book of Luke together, but you're going to resist that as well. That'll be hard. It'll be easy to skip. You won't, maybe in the beginning you'll do well, but at some point you'll be like, really? Am I getting any results? And then what are our expectations? Not understanding that the ancient practices are a gift to us. They're something that will bring a richness to our lives. So let's go ahead and dive into our scripture readings today. And the first one is a really short, just like a single verse, and then it's going to be connected to another book of the Bible, and these are all going to make sense in just a moment, but let me just kind of lay the groundwork so we all know where we're starting. The first verse is in Exodus, and it's the commandment about Sabbath. When the people of Israel were giving the 10 commandments, they had just recently left Egypt, where they had been in slavery for hundreds of years. Their leader Moses, inspired by God, had led them out, and now they're in the desert. They don't even know how to live like normal people because all these past generations and generations, they've been slaves. So, and they certainly don't know how to live and take care of themselves in the desert. And so God, out of his loving heart, gives them some laws and some statutes and ordinances to really help them live successfully as the people of God. And Moses gives them this sort of love letter from God to them, the 10 commandments. And that's the one verse, the fourth commandment I want to read to you. You maybe never even really listened to it very carefully. So we're going to read out of Exodus 23:12. Do your work in 6 days, but on the seventh day you should rest so that your ox and donkey may rest. And even the child of your female slave and the immigrant may be refreshed. So for these people who now have moved into the desert, they're learning resting is important. Now, sadly, they were in the desert to travel to a land that was promised them by God. But what should have been a short trip ended up being a 40-year trip for a lot of different reasons. So they were out in the desert for about 40 years until finally came the day when God said, now you can go into the land that I've promised you. And so our next reading is going to be several books later in the book of Deuteronomy. And what's interesting about this book, so in the beginning of Exodus, we have Moses, who is just starting his journey as their leader. And now in Deuteronomy, he is ending his journey as their leader. He is actually getting close to death, and he will not be traveling with them into the promised land. He won't be going in with them. And so one last time, he gathers them all together, and he gives the same law that was given to them 40 years earlier. It's a new generation of people, and so he gives it to them again to say, as you go into the land that I've promised you, this is what you need to live by. These will make you successful in your life. This is the way you will succeed, by living out these commands. And so the people all gather together. And Moses, he's old, he's elderly, but I know he loves them because he has spent all those years serving them as their leader. And now I'm going to read to you out of Deuteronomy 5:12 through 15. Keep the Sabbath day and treat it as holy, exactly as the Lord your God commanded. 6 days you may work and do all your tasks, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Don't do any work on it. Not you, your sons or daughters, your male or female servants, your ox or donkeys, or any of your animals, or the immigrant who is living among you, so that your male and female servants can rest just like you. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out there with a strong hand and an outreached arm. That's why the Lord your God commands you to keep the Sabbath day. And we're going to talk about what this all means, but isn't it a beautiful picture? This man at the end of his life, one more time saying, this is how God is going to care for you. When you follow these commandments, this is how you're going to know God's blessing. This is going to be the answer to everything. Just be obedient to these laws. But the Israelites, just like us, man, oh man, we struggle to listen to God. And we will see through the years that the Israelites will struggle even with the law that was given to them out of God's love. They will lose sight of the heart of the law, and they'll become very legalistic about it. And Jesus kind of addresses this because we forget, why was the law given to us? As a kid, I used to think God gave us the law because he had no sense of humor and he wasn't fun. I really did. I looked at like the law. We have to live by the 10 Commandments. Now I really see that as this loving gift he gives to us. And Jesus understood that because he said in Mark 2:27 and 28, the Sabbath was created for humans. Do you hear that? The Sabbath was created for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. God made the Sabbath for us because some reason he understood we were not going to be so good at resting. We were not going to be so good at living the way we should live and taking care of ourselves. I mean, we tend to think we're the busiest people in the world, but it turns out a couple thousand years ago, they were too busy too. They were not resting. They were filling up their lives, and they were never pausing to really be restored. And they certainly weren't letting their servants be restored, or their children, or even their animals. And God's like, no, no, no. This is your time to rest. And that means everybody. Because rest is really important to us. So let's talk about why he's insisting on us resting. All right, this is why Sabbath keeping is so important. The first one is because God told us to do it, right? That's why we take communion. That's why we get baptized, because Jesus said, do those things. Well, God said, rest. Which is really funny because so often we just think this is kind of optional. I don't think lying is an option. I don't think committing adultery is an option. I think all the other laws are, God is serious about it. But somehow when it comes to Sabbath, I think, yeah, if it works into my schedule. We have a different or a funny perspective when we think about it. But God commanded us. And here's the thing you need to know. God commanded that we take a day of rest for the health of the community. Not about us, but for the community. That's what this is about. Every one of these practices we've talked about over the month, they're never for us. We meditate for the community. We fast for the community. Everything we do, we step away for the community. Well, it turns out Sabbath keeping is the same thing. It's for the community so that the community can be healthy. Everything we do is always about our brothers and sisters. So, when you think about this fourth commandment, you can't help but remember that God in the book of Genesis says that he created over 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. As a kid, I used to think, God gets tired? You know, that's not what it meant. I honestly believe that, I'm not a person who believes that he created in 6 literal days. I kind of have a different view of it. But regardless of what you believe is okay, we can all disagree on that one. That's one that we can have different opinions. But the message is so important. I mean, I love this because the message is creation isn't done until we rest. Did you hear that? That creation is not complete until we rest. So God created for 6 days, and then he rested, and then it was good. Resting is part of the process. We tend to think we get through Monday through Friday, and okay, we're done. We made it through the week. We're free. It's our time to do whatever we want, and God's like, oh, no, no, no. The week's not complete until you rest. How often do we fill up those weekend days to where there's no time to breathe? Because we got kids, or we got things to do, or a house to keep up, or maybe there's a place to go. I don't know. There's a million ways that we fill it all up. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as those things are ways to rest. The problem is when we just no longer rest at all. The second reason for keeping the Sabbath is that we need time for reflection. In fact, that's why we say come to worship, because it's in worship that you do your most reflecting. Think about it. When you're busy, do you pause and reflect? No. You just stay busy. In fact, a lot of us avoid reflecting because then we start worrying and fretting. I always say I have too much time to think. Well, the reality is that Sabbath keeping is different than having too much time to think. Sabbath keeping is when you come to worship and you reflect on God's faithfulness in your life. That's totally different. When I am reflecting on God's faithfulness from the past, I'm being prepared to have faith in God for the future. I'm pausing to think about all the ways God was faithful. He was faithful with my requests. He was faithful with some of my dreams. He was faithful with the little things, and he's been faithful with the big things. And when I reflect on those, not sit here and worry about what's coming, but instead when I'm thankful, I reflecting and thankful and gratitude, I'm filled with joy, and I have greater faith for the future. And that's really, really important. And that's what worship causes us to do. And I want to address for those of you who are online, if you are online and you're folding laundry and you're on your computer, you're maybe looking at your phone or whatever, it's very hard for us to stay focused these days. I know it, and I think it's especially hard for you guys online. It's a really hard way to do it. Make sure you're taking time to reflect. Allow yourself to be a part of the service in a way that you can reflect so that you can know the joy of gratitude. You see, this is all part of that. God gives us these commands, these gifts, these practices to bless us. And he does bless us through them. The third thing is that we are not to oppress anybody on the day of rest, in the Sabbath keeping day. No oppressing. Now, that's really hard to do because our life is pretty much 7 days a week, right? That's hard to do. I can't but help and pause and think about Chick-fil-A. Seriously, think about it. And I'm one of those people that have driven into Chick-fil-A on many Sundays and oh, shoot, they're closed. But I don't know if you realize that they close to practice Sabbath. That's an intentional thing on the people that own Chick-fil-A. That is to practice Sabbath and keep all of their stores closed so all their employees are resting. It's not just to inconvenience you. It's because they're doing something intentionally. In fact, they're doing it at a loss. And what do we know about Chick-fil-A? God is blessing them. I'm sorry, he is. They have been so blessed, and I believe it comes out of this Sabbath-keeping practice. They're not a perfect company. Those don't exist. But they're trying to do one thing, one single thing that makes a really loud statement to the world. And their employees get a day to rest. They know that everybody had the opportunity, whether they took it or not, they don't know, but they had that opportunity to actually rest. And here's the fourth thing. We practice Sabbath for fellowship. Now, this is kind of a hard one because you're already pausing to say, wait a minute, God wants to take control of my rest. He gets every other part of my life. He wants my heart and my soul and my finances and all the rough edges that really need to be smoothed down. And now you're telling me he wants my days off? Yeah, he does. He wants all of us. And in giving all of ourselves, he does bless us. And one of the things is that Sabbath keeping should also include fellowship with other people. Think about this. When you're super busy, do you get to see your friends? When you're super busy, are you fellowshipping with other people? When was the last time you had, well, because of COVID we can't do, but when's the last time you met up with somebody? When we get super busy, fellowship falls away, but it's the very thing we need. Barbara Brown Taylor says, God did not give us this commandment to a person. He gave it to a people. We need to receive Sabbath and periodically be together with other people. And I'm going to make it really easy for you this week because we're having a Lenten dinner. We haven't had a church-wide Lenten dinner in a while, and so we're going to have one this Wednesday night. You just have to go online and register that you're coming. And we'll have food that will be appropriate for kids as well as adults, and we'll end the dinner with strawberry shortcake because that's what you do around here. And we're going to have a really good meal, and we're just going to sit and talk to each other and enjoy fellowship, and then we're going to go over here and have the imposition of ashes. And I'm very excited, too, because our kids are going to go to Spark. That's our elementary age kids, and we're going to talk to them about it, and if they're comfortable, we'll let them have imposition of ashes. We're going to make this a whole community-wide thing, but we get to eat together first. That's just part of practicing Sabbath, being with the church body, the family of God. So, actually this week, your challenge is pretty darn easy. We're making it super simple, and if you just show up on Wednesday, you will have already completed it. But so here is the challenge for this last week of this series. I'll read it to you, and it's what's written on your little card. This week, the challenge is to practice Sabbath keeping by spending time with others. Sabbath keeping is other-orientated. So to practice Sabbath, you will need to be with other people. If you are able, Come to worship in person. Talk and fellowship with those around you. During the week, ask someone to lunch or out for coffee. Ask your spouse to go on a date with you. Treat someone to dinner. Find rest in the company of others. Of course, unplugging from technology is a plus, and challenge yourself to ignore technology as you spend time with others. I hope you will practice Sabbath this week and have fun in doing it. Be with others. Celebrate God's gift to us. And don't stick your heels in the ground and be like sweet baby girl. That's where we're going to tempt it to be, thinking, no, don't have time. God commands us out of his love for us. So take advantage of the generous water that will quench your thirst. Take advantage of this gift God gives us in Sabbath keeping.